This happened a few years ago when my friends and I had just completed our sophomore year of college and were looking forward to a few months off from school. We wanted to celebrate a little to kick off the summer vacation. We all had small jobs near campus and saved some money. We decided to go big and spend a few days in Las Vegas, where neither of us had ever been before. At first, we were looking through hotels in the city to find something cheap but still large enough. There are 4 of us. We eventually gave up and started looking into Airbnbs, which were generally cheaper and larger. We found a few good ones, but ultimately chose the largest one with the most rooms. Fast forward a few weeks, and our Uber picked us up from the airport and dropped us off at home. It actually looked bigger in person, and we were all very excited to spend the next few days together. We unpacked and relaxed for a few hours because we were exhausted from the flight. My friend Alyssa and I were the only ones awake a few hours after the sun had gone down. It was not too late, probably 8 or 8:30, but the other 2 had decided to sleep early. With nothing to do, Alyssa offered to go for a walk outside and explore the neighborhood a little. I agreed, excited to see the unique homes. I should mention that our Airbnb was a nice house, and the neighboring homes were also nice. This was not a sketchy street, so we didn't hesitate to go for a walk around. We went outside and down the street. After passing 6 or 7 houses, the street made a sharp turn and connected with another crossing road, with homes on the side. It was strange though, because these homes were not like the ones we had just passed on our street. I'm not trying to be rude, but these were basically run-down shacks. It was strange to see such a dramatic change in homes after only turning a corner. We continued for a little while, noticing broken windows, missing mailboxes, and worn-out vacant signs on many of the doors. One of the houses had a ripped and stained sofa chair right in the middle of their front yard. We agreed to take the next turn towards our Airbnb and return. However, a few minutes later, we noticed a small SUV approaching us from down the road, its headlights off. As it got closer, it slowed and eventually came to a stop right next to us. An older woman, probably between the ages of 50 and 60, rolled down the window and smiled, saying, "You two are such a cute couple." She was making weird, jerky motions with her head and her arms and generally acting strange. I responded, "Thank you for quickly ending the conversation and getting her to leave." Fortunately, it worked. She continued down the road, and so did we in the opposite direction. After a few minutes, we discovered the next turn and returned to the street with our Airbnb. We were both very shaken and creeped out by the situation and just wanted to go inside and forget about it. But just as we got to the driveway, we noticed the old lady SUV turn down our road and return towards us. We were about halfway up the driveway when she came to a stop right in front of us, the house. But this time things were a little different. She simply looked at us. She did not say anything or show any emotion on her face. She had just started. Alyssa rushed inside, and I quickly followed. As I closed the door behind us, I heard the car continue down the road. We stayed up a little later, locking all the doors and checking the windows to ensure she didn't return. After an hour, we decided we were probably fine, so we went to our rooms and prepared for bed. The next day, we told our other friends about what had happened, and they were also quite creeped out. We ended up telling the Airbnb owner about the situation and even asked if we could cancel our 3rd day so we could leave earlier. And fortunately, he agreed. We decided to spend the rest of the day getting out of the house and exploring the city in order to make the most of our time in Vegas. We had a great time, but by the end of the night, we were ready to call an Uber and return home. During the ride back, I got a text from the owner asking, "Is this the lady from last night with a photo attached?" I opened it and saw a screenshot of the ringing doorbell. The lady is shown standing outside the house. I responded to the owner and immediately shared it with all of my friends. We had no idea what to do, so we asked the driver to drop us off at a hotel parking lot, just a few blocks from our house, while the owner called the police. After about 45 minutes, the owner called me to say the house was clear and we could leave. However, he stated that the police never found the lady. This clearly made none of us feel any better. We arrived at the house and immediately began packing all of our belongings in preparation for our departure the next morning. Nothing happened overnight or the next morning, but I can assure you that none of us slept well. We got out of there as soon as possible and headed to the airport. This was one of the strangest things that has ever happened to me, and I am still thinking about it. I have thought about it a lot. The only advice I have is to always check the area around your Airbnb before booking. I have no idea what she wanted or why she was stalking us, but it makes me nervous to think about what would have happened if the owner hadn't installed a doorbell camera or if we had stayed that third day. This year, I took a solo vacation to Oregon. Towards the end of winter. I was just trying to use my extra vacation days at work. Use them up. The city I stayed in was small, but I wasn't looking for that. I wanted to be in Upper Oregon's beautiful natural surroundings rather than in a crowded city. The small city had a few hotels, but they were strangely expensive, so I opted for an Airbnb. It also turned out to be a reasonable distance from the city, which was beneficial in my eyes. The only drawback was that it was a guest house, which meant that the owners lived in the main house on the property, which was right next door. It wasn't the isolation I sought, but it was preferable to being in a city. I arrived at Airbnb late at night, tired from the long drive. The house was surrounded by dense forest, making it difficult to see anything other than the porch light's faint glow. As I approached the door, I gently knocked. The host, a friendly woman in her 40s, greeted me at the door and directed me to the guest house. She handed me the key and showed me around the room, explaining how to use the various appliances and where I could find extra blankets. We made some small talk, and she told me she'd been living here alone for 15 years, as well as about wildlife and other topics. After she left, I settled in and prepared some food. As I sat at the kitchen table, I realized the moonlight was illuminating the entire house, and that's when I noticed there were no curtains covering any of the windows. It was strange, but I didn't think too much about it. When I was getting ready for bed, I threw an extra blanket over one of the windows to help block some of the light, but it didn't work very well. The bed was comfortable, but I had trouble falling asleep. I awoke several times due to a strange smell in the room. I opened the window to let in some fresh air, but I'm pretty sure the smell was in the wood or something. I expected to get used to it after a day, but I never did. I woke up early and ate granola for breakfast, but as I was packing my hiking bag, I was startled by a woman standing at the front window. She smiled and waved as we made eye contact. I opened the front door. She asked how my night went and if I had any problems. I declined to be non-confrontational, and she left. I packed my bags and drove out to a nearby hiking trail. It was late, probably around 9 p.m., when I returned to Airbnb. I pulled up the gravel driveway and began walking to the door when I noticed the woman quickly walk away from behind the guest house. I came to a halt and waited for a moment, slightly perplexed, before continuing on my way and entering. Nothing seemed out of place, so I didn't bother worrying about it. I went to bed half an hour later, without bothering to cover the window again. But after only a few minutes, I heard the distinct sound of a car driving down the gravel driveway. It drove all the way up to the house and then came to a stop. Someone stepped out, and I heard the woman greet them. They were whispering while standing outside, motionless. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I knew the other person was a man. From the sound of their whispering, I heard them start walking, not into the main house, but towards the guest house I was in. I widened my eyes and paid closer attention. Hearing the footsteps get closer, I looked around at all the windows, desperately feeling vulnerable as if I were in a cage. Whoever was out there took a slow walk around the house before coming to a halt near the back wall. I had my gaze fixed on the window in that direction for what seemed like an eternity, waiting for them to leave. Then I noticed the faint glow of their eyes in the corner of the window, looking back at me. I jumped up, and they took off. I quickly looked out the window and noticed someone getting into a truck and driving away. I immediately packed everything and got into my car. As I drove away, I noticed the woman step outside and attempt to wave me down. I did not stop until I arrived home. I'm not sure what happened or was happening, but something was clearly wrong. After a few days of thinking about it, I decided to look into it myself. I looked up the house and the woman who lives there. I discovered her Facebook account, which revealed that she was married and had been for 15 years. I didn't find much else, but she had told me she had been living alone for 15 years, so something was strange. It's been 4 months, but I still think about it often, wondering what the woman was hiding, why the place smelled so strange, and what the man was up to. My boyfriend and I were visiting my parents in Michigan for a few days, but we didn't want to stay with them for obvious reasons. We ended up booking an Airbnb about 15 minutes away from their house, a charming little one-bedroom condo. Then the side was completely redone and very modern, so it wasn't the cheapest option. The hosts appeared friendly and had high ratings, but we noticed a few comments that raised some red flags. The majority of the negative comments described strange encounters with the neighbor. Now, I've had some crazy neighbors, so I'm not one to judge. I simply brought it up with the host before booking, and she stated that her neighbor is nosy, and when people try to enter the Airbnb, she becomes defensive. But she said she'd inform the neighbor that we're staying and what we look like, so everything should be fine. Everything went smoothly when we arrived. We met the host, who lived nearby, and she gave us the key to the entry door, as well as the code for the actual apartment. We unpacked our belongings and then went to my parents for dinner. I had a few drinks throughout the night to deal with my mother, and before we knew it, it was 10 p.m. and time to go home. The Airbnb. We drove up to our rental. Each complex now has 4 apartments, 2 on the bottom and 2 on top. And the room we were staying in was on the top left. However, when we arrived, we noticed a small figure standing between some curtains in the apartment's window on the upper right. I immediately felt weird. Who just stares out the window like that? My boyfriend parked, and when I got out, I looked up again, and she was still there, staring at us. As we walked towards the front door, I could see her features. You know how some people have a crazy look on their faces? This was her. Mangled brown hair and wide open eyes. She had to be at least 60 or 70 years old, and she had this frown. I've never seen anyone so angry. She says nothing. She simply stands there, watching us. She is small and round, but the way she stood revealed that her arms and legs were extremely thin. My boyfriend and I exchanged a brief glance before starting to make our own way up. We walked up while she stared at us, but to my surprise, she said nothing. Rather, she simply stared at us with creepy eyes. I kept looking back as my boyfriend entered the code, and we hurriedly entered the apartment. What the hell was that? My boyfriend said it softly and looked at me puzzled. I shook my head, relieved she didn't try to talk to us. Nothing unusual happened. The rest of the night, until we heard a banging on the front door. I jumped out of bed, only to find that my boyfriend was already awake. The banging continued for about a minute or two before stopping abruptly. I checked my phone, and it was nearly 4 a.m. Who would be pounding on the door at this time? My boyfriend walked towards the door, whispering to me that he was going to look through the peephole to see who it was. Was it there? I followed him slowly as he inspected. He looked back at me, clearly perplexed. He opened the door slightly to look around, and I heard him gasp. I whispered and took a slow step towards him. 3 dead rats lay on the welcome mat outside the door, completely gutted, with only one of them still having their heads attached. He closed the door, and we both agreed to contact the host later in the day. I tried to sleep, but the images of those rats kept replaying in my head. After a while, I checked my phone and it was 6:30. Accepting that I would not be able to sleep, I got up to make coffee, only to hear the neighbor's door slam shut. I looked out the kitchen window, which overlooks the parking lot, hoping to catch a glimpse of the crazy lady. But there she was, standing and staring at our parked car, not looking at anything inside. She was simply staring at it. She stared at her car for a long time before slowly turning her head to look directly at me. I jumped back a little and immediately heard her shriek, a horrible blood-curdling shriek, as if she was being attacked. My boyfriend bolted out of the bedroom, obviously alarmed, and we both looked out the window again. The neighbor stood there, holding her head and screaming at the driver's side window. She grabbed the top of the car and began banging her head, screaming as if they would never leave. When will they leave? And why are they still coming? I began recording for insurance purposes. My boyfriend first called the police, then the host. By the time the cops arrived, she was lying on the ground next to her car, which was in relatively good condition given what we had just witnessed. The host apologized profusely, stated that this had never happened before, and refunded the entire trip. We got to see the lady being led away in handcuffs, though she took a while to cooperate. We never found out what was wrong with her, but my theory is that something snapped, and we happened to be present when it happened. But I am aware that you should consider every review when booking an Airbnb, every single one.